You know what's wild? We live in an age right now where marketers can tell you down to the decimal point how many people clicked a button, scrolled past a paragraph, rage quit a landing page after 4.3 seconds. I mean, we can really track everything. And yet, most of us have absolutely no idea whether anybody actually trusts us. Like, do our audiences believe we understand them? Do they use our content, our thought leadership to actually make decisions? Or are they just there, scrolling, nodding, never coming back? Here's the thing, we can actually measure that, but maybe not the way you think. So how do we score something as messy, human, and wonderfully unquantifiable as trust? So welcome back. I'm Robert Rose. If you're new here, hi, glad you found this. If you've been with me since part one of this series, well, first of all, thank you to your commitment for a series about measurement frameworks. I mean, that's genuinely a niche hobby, and I totally respect it. But quick recap for you. In part one, what I did was I introduced the Audience Trust Index, a way to take the emotional temperature of our target audience. Are they warm to us, lukewarm, actively icing us out? And in part two, I introduced the idea of the Trust Lattice framework itself, a kind of a way to map the depth and breadth of our audience relationships across 4 dimensions and 4 levels of relational depth, so we can sort of heat map it, if you will. And then I gave you a scoring system in that. Each side of the Latticeworks cell gets a score from 1 to 10 for a maximum of 40 per cell. That, of course, is completely up to you. It could be 50, it could be 100, whatever you wanted to do there. But anyway, it left a lot of you asking, okay, well, enough with the metaphors, Robert. Where on earth do those numbers actually come from? That's a great question. That's exactly what we're going to cover today. How do we actually score the 4 sides of that lattice framework? What signals do we look for? And what does it feel like to actually run this thing on our own brand, including, by the way, the humbling parts? So buckle up. We got a lot of ground to cover. Now, before I get into the actual signal clusters and examples of measurement, etc., I got to address something. This is the elephant in the room, the enormous, inconvenient, qualitative elephant in the room. This entire framework that I'm proposing here is by design subjective. This is not a formula. This is not a mathematical proof of ROI. You don't plug in numbers here and get a score out the other side that proves that your content marketing is generating revenue. What we're building is a diagnostic tool, and diagnostic tools require 3 things that no dashboard is ever going to give you. 1, human judgment. 2, context. And most importantly, organizational agreement, relationships with your organization about what good even looks like. Think about it this way. In your CRM right now, what counts as an engaged opportunity? Like, how do you define an engaged opportunity? And I guarantee you, it's probably different from the company that does your business down the street. It's almost certainly in your business a judgment call that someone somewhere encoded into a criteria and then maybe forgot about it and it has just become culture in your business. The same principle applies here. The trust lattice works when your team agrees on the thresholds. A 7 has to mean something specific to your organization. Otherwise, we're just doing interpretive dance. Basically, we're just making it up. So before I walk you through the 4 signal clusters, I want to say this clearly. You're not building a weather app to measure the raindrops. Basically, you're building a climate station. We're not scoring individual people here. We are reading the weather patterns of a whole audience segment, the aggregated emotional climate between your story, your brand, and a cohort of humans that you want to engage and impact with higher trust. So each of the 4 sides gets its own station, and each station reads a cluster of signals. Now, no single signal is the score. The pattern, the aggregate, or the mean is the actual score. All right, 4 sides, each scored 0 to 10. Max score, 40. Let's roll. So the empathy score answers one question. Does this audience feel like we actually get them? Not do they like us, not did they click on the thing. Does your content land like it was written by somebody who has sat in their chair, felt their pain, or does it read like it was written by someone who Googled pain points and called it research? You know the content I'm talking about. You feel it. You judge it. So how do you measure that? Well, a couple of example clusters that we could look at. So the first is what I call expressed sentiment. What are they actually saying about you and in response to you? Comments on LinkedIn, replies to your newsletter, forum threads, polls, surveys. You're not just counting thumbs up, you're looking for recognition, language that signals the audience feels seen. Quote, "This is exactly what I needed," is a great one, right? That's a 9. Interesting perspective. That's a polite 5. Wrong, actually. That's data 2, and honest data at that. Second cluster, resonance depth, the behavioral echo of that sentiment. So reply rates on newsletters, not open rates. Anybody can open an email. Reply rates. How many people replied to what you said? Voluntary sharing in private channels, the substance of comments, not just the count. Warm, cooling, frozen. There's your empathy score for that particular audience cohort against that content pillar. All right, get to side 2. Reciprocal utility, the value score. So side 2 moves from do they like the story to do they use the story. This is where content marketing has to get honest with itself, because a lot of what we do and call thought leadership is philosophically satisfying content that nobody actually does anything with. And I'm speaking from experience here. So 2 measurement clusters as examples here of what we might look at. Decision support utility. Is your content moving people toward a decision? Are you looking at citation rates? Is your research getting referenced in third-party articles? And increasingly important, in AI-generated answers. Are people returning to specific pieces of content? Return to content rates and specific content rates, like the how-to, basically one of the most underused signals in the whole stack, using the fact that we create a how-to versus the visionary white paper. How many people are returning back to that based on their subscription to the former? And then second, job to be done alignment. Survey the audience, but ask the right question. Did you find this content valuable? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Everybody's going to say yes. It's the content equivalent to, how are you doing? I mean, nobody's going to answer, well, fine. I'm doing fine. It was fine. Ask rather, did this content help you complete a specific task or make a specific decision? That distinction between feeling valuable and being useful is the difference between vanity content and building trust to usability and and true use case. That gets us to side 3. Predictable governance, the trust score. So side 3 is where all of us grown-ups live with the idea of trust. This dimension answers, is the experience of our brand consistent and reliable across every surface, every channel over time? And here's what makes this one different from the other 3. You can monitor sentiment and utility kind of continuously these days with tools. This kind of governance, this sort of look, it kind of requires a periodic audit, a snapshot, if you will. And that audit is really only meaningful if you've done the foundational work first. In other words, we have to document our content strategy. See what I did there? See, I brought it back to content strategy and all of that? Yes. Build a governance model. Define what your brand experience is actually supposed to be so that we actually have a standard for what good looks like across all the areas that we're doing. Without that baseline, there's nothing to audit against. You're just wandering around your own content operations pointing at things. So 2 clusters we can look at here. Cross-surface, cross-experience, consistency. Does our newsletter deliver the same quality of value as our website? Does the follow-up email match the tone of the thought leadership that brought these people in? You don't measure the lattice at the channel level. Of course, that's not, as I mentioned last week, this is not where we want to do that, but you do need to occasionally examine whether any one channel or surface is quietly undermining the whole relationship of trust. And the most honest metric in this whole framework, the promise to delivery ratio. So every piece of content makes an implicit promise. Read this and you'll understand something you didn't before, we like to say. High governance scores mean low surprise. And in B2B, low surprise is the superpower. Low surprise means trust. High surprise, the bad kind, means churn. That gets us to the last, which is what we call side 4, or the proximity signal. And I like to call this the loud cue. So side 4 is my actual favorite because it's kind of where the audience stops just responding to your content and starts doing things in your favor without being asked. So the proximity signal is what I call the validation layer, right? It confirms that the other three sides aren't just internal assumptions that make you feel good on a Monday morning meeting. They actually validate some of the things that you're seeing out there. So a couple of clusters here that we can think about. One, reputation lending. In other words, unprompted mentions, organic shares. When a professional attaches their credibility to your brand or content by recommending it without a referral bonus, without being asked, that's a loud clue. Active participation, the trajectory from passive consumption to active commitment. Reading a blog post is passive. Commenting, replying, sending you an email, doing those things in a Slack channel is active. Sharing with a buying committee is committed. The trajectory matters here way more than the volume here, but that's the idea, is to start to measure how much of that is happening. And time with experts is another one. In the credibility economy these days, time is one of the scarcest resource anybody has in our world. If somebody listened to your 30-minute podcast, read your technical white paper, or sat through your live webinar, they have made a check mark or a vote with the most finite currency they have. That is a loud cue. So, the proximity signal score is the aggregate velocity and intensity of all of those loud clues. It's the final confirmation that the Latticeworks cell is actually now strengthening. Okay, now just very quickly, this is the part where I sort of eat my own cooking. I want to talk about something that I actually did because I think it's more useful than just putting this out there as a hypothetical. I ran this Trust Lattice on my own personal brand, Robert Rose, right? And so I built a very light AI agent in Anthropic's Claude Cowork to score all 4 relational levels: alignment, empathy, trust, advocacy, across all 4 sides of the Lattice cell at each of those levels against my own content pillar. In fact, related to this series, I tested Robert Rose and content marketing measurement strategy. And the signals, by the way, they came from real unowned sources. I went to Reddit's the subreddit of content marketing, industry research that's out there, LinkedIn engagement patterns, observable behavior across a few services that I don't own. Now, of course, in a real setting, this would, of course, include all my emails, my first-party data, all of that. But I just wanted to do this as a quick test and look out there what was happening. And here's what came back. So you can see my highest score, shared sentiment at the empathy level, a 9. Great. People feel understood with my content. I'm hitting the empathy button pretty hard. Great, that tracks. My most humbling score, reciprocal utility at the alignment level, a 6. Now, here's what that means in plain English, right? As I sort of looked at it, over the last year or so, I've promoted and talked about multiple frameworks for content marketing measurement, multiple approaches to marketing measurement, and practitioners intellectually sort of agree with them, but they haven't applied them. Philosophy is lovely. Tools are, of course, better. So I'm writing things that feel smart to make people feel seen, but not enough things that feel immediately usable. That's a clear strategic brief for me, and it came from that score, not from just a feeling. And probably the most honest number on the board here, look at that proximity signal at the advocacy level, a 5. So there's no doubt a community of content marketing practitioners are out there championing this kind of work, content marketing measurement, but they're not quoting me in that. They're not sort of unprompted quoting me as sort of an expert or a thought leader in that. Now, what that means is I'm better at making people feel seen right now on content marketing measurement than I am at making it easy for them to demonstrate what they feel seen. That is a very specific thing for me to work on, and the page views and downloads from Content Marketing Institute or my own website would have never surfaced that. That's the whole point of this framework. It helps us be better at managing the climate where demand for our work, it can't even exist until it's warmed up to be able to grow. So the last thing before we close out here, just know that this is not a set it and forget it kind of dashboard. As I mentioned, one has an audit, the other sort of get measured. These are snapshots in your discipline. Your first snapshot, it'll set a baseline. The second measures any deviation. Every subsequent snapshot after that starts to reveal the long-term trends. Monthly, quarterly cadence, whatever is right for you, frequent enough to catch the shifts in the climate, infrequent enough to avoid chasing sort of the noise. And here's where those patterns really become genuinely useful. So you think about a declining empathy score with a rising value score? Great. Your content is useful, but kind of emotionally disconnected. You're solving problems for people who don't feel understood. There's a ceiling there. High governance score with a weak proximity signal. You're consistent and the services are consistent, but they're kind of uninspiring, safe, but not generating advocacy. You're the brand equivalent of a reliably decent hotel coffee in the urn in the lobby. These patterns become the strategic brief for your content marketing team. Not make better content, something specific, something actionable, something only a diagnostic this deep can tell you. All right. So we started this episode with a question. How do you score something as messy and human and just gloriously unquantifiable as trust? And the answer is carefully, collaboratively, with shared definitions, repeatable signals, and enough humility to look at a 5 on your proximity score and say, yeah, I earned that. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. Okay, Robert, this is well and good, but who actually aggregates these sentiment scores, creates the standards, audits the cross-surface consistency, monitors advocacy across multiple personas every quarter? How do we do this? Like, how did you do that? Even set the basic boundaries for your own examination? There's no Google report for that. There's no Tableau dashboard for that. Am I the one who has to build this AI tool that does all this? Those are exactly the right questions. And no, you don't need 40 analysts, but yes, you do need a human. And yes, AI can help you do much of this lift these days. That's what we'll cover next week in part 4, the final installment of this series, how agentic AI, AI-powered orchestration tools, and humans make this framework not just theoretically elegant, but maybe operationally real. So the full article for today's episode, including the complete signal cluster breakdowns, measurement examples, and the full scorecard as I sort of looked at it, is linked in the post. Read it, bookmark it, argue with it, let me know, and subscribe so you don't miss part 4. The measurement stethoscope you've just learned to build is only as good as the technology that holds it to the marketing's chest. Take the time to actually listen, because it's your story. Tell it well. I'll see you next week.